Okay, may I have your attention, please? Good afternoon. Good afternoon, man. My name is Syed Tariq Anwar. I am a professor in the management, marketing, and general business. Uh, Today we have a very good program. In fact, 10 years ago we started this program. I was telling Pat, and in the same, not in the same room, downstairs we have a program when markets collapsed, 2008 financial crisis, and I told him that I invited him at that time, and he still looked the same. I don't know what's the magic these Amarillo National Bank guys they have. They don't get old. So, but Dr. Owens was my speaker, and today we have today we have Mr. John Polley. He's our next speaker. But just want to let you know what happened in the last 10 years. So we had a very big, excuse me, this is a stadium dust. So because we are building a stadium, so we had a very big crisis in 2008, and we had a program. These guys came, and we had a wonderful session. But in the last 10 years, and because of that crisis, $12 trillion disappeared. And that's what the money was lost. I have some data for you here, and we don't want to go through that. But please go through this. And I also made sure that we have list of all the selected books and articles. But before we start, our president, Isabel Madera, is over there. Thank you for your hard work. Vice President Kilado Jichuan Chote. Sorry for my pronunciation. Is she here? Okay. And then we have Brigham Beecher. He's our social media vice president. Membership, Colton McMahon. McMahon, is he here? Okay. Colton is over there. And then fundraising, Kimberly Serrano, not here. Kimberly, okay. And then we have Anne Wynn. She's also one of our, he's over there. Okay, and then we have Michael Little. He is our communication VP, and then VP Finance, Alejandro Paccio. So these guys have done a very good work. This kind of seminar is not a work of one person, it's a collective effort. And let's give a hand to our officers. They have done a very good job. Okay, so our first speaker is Pat, and Mr. Pat Ware. He's the Executive Vice President of Amarillo National Bank. So he will talk about what happened in the last 10 years. And we are not going to go before 2008, but I asked Pat to talk about Amarillo, Panhandle, where do we stand, and what lies ahead in the next 5 years. After that, Dr. Owen will come and he will share his thoughts. And then we have John Polley. He works for Morgan Stanley, and he will tell us what's going on, what happened, and what would happen in the next 5 years. But we did not make a very strict outline for this session. Feel free to ask, but I will recommend that please hold your questions, and when they are all done, then the last 15 minutes, we will have Q&A. So let's give a warm welcome to our friend Pat Ware.
Well, thank y'all for having us up here. I think it was 10 years ago, and it was one of the first talks like this I ever gave. I think I was 2 or 3 years out of graduate school, and I wanted everybody to know how smart I was. And the smarter I tried to sound, the dumber I looked. And then it was then and there where I realized leave all the complicated stuff up to Professor Owens. He can explain the most complicated stuff and simplify it down to where everybody can understand it so much better than anybody I've ever seen. So listen to everything he says. We're up here to asked to talk about how the 2008 financial crisis affected this area. And then so we've looked at from 2008 to now how the crisis hit our area, and it did have an impact in our area. The 2008 crisis hit Amarillo in a very specific way because when the financial market shut down after Lehman Brothers bankruptcy, it triggered a drop in commodity prices. So the drop you see starting here in 2008, it started with the financial crisis, and we call it a commodity-led recession here in Amarillo. Cattle, dairy prices, ag, oil and gas, all those commodity prices dropped, and that led to huge job losses. Retail sales decreased, and subprime lending home and auto all but vanished. Bell Helicopter was the only major employer in Amarillo to keep hiring during the 2009 recession. Everybody else stopped hiring, and we saw job losses. You can see from our chart, we slowly started to climb out of it due to the Fed's low interest rates and the benefits of living in Texas. 2011, we started, so the economy started climbing up back to 2011, but then we saw another slowdown in 2011. That was due to drought in this area. In 2011, we only got 7.1 inches of rain. It was the lowest measurement ever recorded. Farm incomes were hit as production was down 60% from the year before. Ranchers liquidated their herds and grazing was eliminated. The drought continued for the next 3 growing seasons from 2011 to 2014. Over that period, we only saw 54 inches of rain when the average should have been over 80. If we would have hit the average per year, it would have been over 80 inches. 2012 to 2014, we saw a mini recovery as a mini oil boom hit our area. Horizontal drilling kind of that technology came to the Eastern Panhandle, and there was a mini boom over there. They were getting some really high producing wells over there, and that led to some economic growth in our area, and it led to job gains. We didn't get as much benefit from the oil and gas boom nationally as the Permian Basin did, but we still got some. The reason we didn't is because the majority of our production is natural gas, whereas in the Permian it's probably 90% oil. Up here it's probably 2/3 to 80% natural gas. And with natural gas prices, there's no supply all over the world, and those prices stayed between $2 and $4. So we didn't see as much benefit as the Permian, but we still saw some benefit. Oil prices from 2012 to 2014 averaged $95 during this time. As I said, natural gas prices stayed around $3, and that $3 is kind of the break even around here. So I'll get into why we saw another downturn, and that's probably because of the natural gas prices after 2015. So 2012 to 2014, the oil boom helped bring back jobs to the area, mostly oil and gas related, and also manufacturing. 2015, there was a commodity crash. You can see on our graph, we slowed down in this area as well. There was an oversupply of commodities throughout the world, and then there was some currency manipulation going on in China. Oil went below $30. Natural gas went from over $4 to around $2.50. The Panhandle, there were 80 drilling rigs in 2014. At the end of 2016, there were 6. Cattle prices went from profits of $300 per head to losses of over $220 per head. At our bank, we're big cattle lenders, so the feed yards in this area, we monitor those pretty close, and we kept talking to our customers over that time, what's going on, why are these losses so large? They said it's not so much due to supply and demand in the market. You're not seeing that reflected in the prices. It's that these traders on Wall Street, the high-frequency traders, were making up 95% of all trading in cattle futures that year. So these people were turning what should be turning a commodity that should be based on supply and demand, and they were just turning into a little financial instrument they can trade over and over and over. It was kind of the Bitcoin of the time. So during that time, the commodity crash, our area suffered, but things started picking up again. In 2016, we started seeing some recovery. One thing, it started raining around here. From 2015 to 2017, we averaged 26 inches of rain over that time period. But most importantly, in 2016, we got confidence. From 2008 to 2016, there was no growth in the national economy. The Fed's low interest rate policy did not trigger the inflation that they thought it would, but here, let me go back. The inflation expectations were just tampered. The Fed thought by lowering interest rate, could increase inflation, and with increasing inflation, you get a rise up in commodity prices, but also in companies' expectations for the futures. When companies think about higher prices in the future, they're going to think about investing, they're going to think about hiring, they're going to think about growing. When there was no inflation expectations, companies didn't do anything, so the economy didn't grow. The only good news over this period was a booming stock market. And the only reason the stock market was booming, it was tied to the low interest rate policy. It was not investment in CapEx or company profits. Businesses only invested in buybacks and dividends, which brought nothing to the economy. But something triggered in 2016, and companies started hiring and investing again in CapEx, and we saw that in this area too. Customers at our bank came in with they were just revitalized. There was more confidence in the economy. There was more excitement, more things going on. And we're starting to see a lot of the benefits from that. We are starting to see some inflation due to the, I don't want to say overheating economy, but for the booming economy. And also very tight labor markets. Companies in this part of the country and all over the country are finding it very hard to keep up with their competitors or keep hiring. This is perfect for all you seniors or all you graduate students because you're entering a high job market where the wages are going to be up. It's going to be very competitive for you to get a job. But with y'all's degree and y'all's experience here at WT, y'all are set up very well. One thing we like to talk about is area banks since the crisis. And in 2008, there was a lot more, it felt like there was a lot more of the out-of-town major money center banks in this area, and that's kind of fallen apart. The local banks since 2008 have become stronger. They grew their capital and they kept their lending policies conservative. The too big to fail guys, when you look at those that are in Amarillo, Amarillo and Canyon, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and JP Morgan, in 2008, their market share was 21%. And this last year in 2018, it was 17%. So they didn't grow at all over that time, while local banks kind of grew their deposit base and attracted more customers. So the things we've learned over the last 10 years since the, I guess they call it the Great Recession, we call it the financial meltdown, is the Panhandle is not immune to the national economy. What happens in New York on Wall Street can have an impact in Amarillo, especially when it's tied to area commodities. We are diverse though, and we are not tied to a single industry. If you look at Midland, Odessa over the last 10 years, they're probably in their second oil boom, but the last bust on the oil boom from 2012 to 2014 was devastating. They're losing 10,000 jobs a month, and when oil prices went down in the 30s, and they're tied to a single industry, and they're in a boom again. So what that tell you is that that bust is going to happen again to Midland, Odessa. So our economy is very diverse. We continue to rely on agriculture, feed yards, dairies, manufacturing, oil, gas, and our medical center. That diverse base is a solid foundation for any economy, and that's what you want to see, and that's what has attracted people to Texas is the diverse economy. But again, I single out Midland, Odessa as kind of the boom-bust area. Everywhere else should be insulated from violent price swings in commodities. What I want to close out with is something I learned from Professor Owens is this area is probably the best place in the world to do business, to learn business, to grow and to start your careers, because Panhandle people have a stronger work ethic, a love of this area, and access to some of the best education on earth. So as long as the people in this room can keep that going, just keep going, learn a lot, stay in this area, work hard, and grow it. I think this part of the country will continue to be one of the best places on the entire planet to do business. So with that, I'll leave it to Dr. Owens to teach y'all something really interesting about finance.
Well, thank you to Dr. Anwar and your marketing mavens. I don't know if you're aware, but you picked perfect timing. This is World Investor Week. October 1 to October 7th is World Investor Week. And there are on six continents, there are efforts to inform people about investing. So it's well timed. You're 2 weeks behind the anniversary of Lehman Brothers, which was the 15th of September 2008. The largest single bankruptcy we've ever had in this country was when Lehman Brothers went down. And the sad part is about a week later, we bailed out AIG. In hindsight, I think a lot of the shock of the 2008 crisis, had we bailed out Lehman Brothers, it was only about another $82 billion. Had we done that, I think the shock factor would have been a lot less. But that was one that just went worldwide. People thought, how can an investment house over 100 years old, and they, for those who are unaware, they had sold preferred stock in February of that year, of 2008. If you bought it by September the 15th, it was worthless. Less than a year. And again, highly rated stock. It was a high preferred stock, had a high dividend, came out with a lot of hype. Within about 8 months, you had nothing. Anybody who bought it for their portfolio was wiped out. So you picked a good time. One of the interesting phenomena that you need to be aware of relative to what we call the Great Recession, not depression, but recession, is that as of this point, the top 10% of wealth holders in the United States own 84% of the stocks. The top 20% of the wealth holders own 93% of the stocks. Right? That means the other 80% of the citizens in this country own 7% of the stock, whether it be in a mutual fund, a 401k, an IRA, whatever. And what happened during the crisis is when the market fell apart, and I'll put some numbers up in a little bit and show you. When the market dropped, it frightened people so much that a lot of these small investors, and even though they were investing in mutual funds, never came back. The difficulty is they missed out on the last 10 years. It just isn't there. And let me show you very briefly, if I can get the right one to come up. Okay, this is looking at since 2008. Now, I went back to 2007 in order to draw percentages. What happens is, in 2008, and most of this was triggered by the housing crisis. Now, the interesting thing is, in 2006, there were hints that the housing market was beginning to unravel. And a lot of realtors looked and said, that's a good thing. It will draw people back into the market. Because the prices in 2006 quit accelerating and beginning to taper, leaving aside a couple of the bizarre areas like Las Vegas, etc. But what happened is, a side note, always running down a rabbit hole, one of my colleagues here at the university who has since retired owned a lot in Pahrump, Nevada, just outside Las Vegas. At the boom of it, he was dumb lucky enough, it was not smart, believe me, I know him pretty well. He sold the lot and got enough money for the lot that when Las Vegas real estate market cratered, he bought a house in the same neighborhood already built and paid for it. Gives you an idea of what happened in Las Vegas. The bottom just came out. It's happening again out there. It's rising like crazy. Right? Again, it just happens to be one of those areas. But on balance, in 2006, we saw it begin to slow down. 2007, there were more hints, but nobody wanted to believe them. By 2008, it became obvious because the losses were real. This is what happened in the stock market, and I use the S&P 500, and I picked July 1 of each year just to play fair. So it's not January or December, it just happens to be mid-year. Those are the rates of return. Compound return, 12.4%. Right? If you were in the market. The problem is, remember, only the top 20% of the US population is in the market. They're the only ones who gain. If you panicked in 2009, when the S&P 500 went to 935, and you dumped your stock, and you immediately put it into either a CD or a T-bill. By the way, with apologies to Pat, the CD rate is Amarillo National Bank. I pulled it off this morning. That's their 1-year rate. But that's what you earned in a certificate of deposit. That's what you earned in a T-bill. And that's what you missed out on by not being in the market. So when you hear people talk about the rich get richer, this is what happened. Is that if you stayed in the market after 2008, after 2009 when it bottomed, look at the returns you got. And the problem, what it has done is it has completely changed up the way we look at risk and return. In the sense that you've got a very small group of people who were willing and able to take that equity risk. Thus, we have right now in the U.S. the greatest wealth inequality we've ever seen. It is absolutely enormous, and in a moment or two I'll talk a little bit why I think that might be a problem going forward. This kind of shows you what the debts look like between 2008 and 2018. The mortgages are basically about where they were. Haven't really changed much. House prices haven't changed either, just by the by. I moved from Canyon to Amarillo about 15 years ago. We paid about $85 to $90 a square foot. Right now in Amarillo, it's $100. Nothing has happened in that decade. Right? So again, for a lot of people, if you're not in the stock market, their wealth was in their house. It hasn't moved for the last 10 years. It's just stuck there. So the mortgages are pretty constant. Auto loans, they went up. Actually, they came down through about 2012. Since then, they've gone up. Now, we are seeing in 2018, the report that came out yesterday, there is a decline in auto sales. But again, I think it's because we've kind of met the demand, and we're a little uncertain of what's going to happen with this thing on all the imports from overseas. Credit cards have gone from 986 to 1 trillion. That's 2 people went shopping, and it's in the rounding, so that's not a big deal. One of them that you should know about, that you should be very familiar about, student loans have increased 144% in that decade. We've gone now from 627 to 1.5 trillion dollars. In my view, that is one of the great risks facing us going forward. Right now, close to 20% of them are delinquent. The interesting thing about the delinquent student loans is most of them are under $10,000, and they're held by people who came to college and then dropped out. Therefore, they weren't able to get the high-paying jobs. Therefore, they're not able to pay back their student loans. And by the way, you can never get away from a student loan until you die. You can't bankrupt yourself away from it. It's like the IRS. You're there until you're 6 under. They've got you. So next year, by the way, any of you borrowing, the rate goes up to 5%. All right, so it's at 4 right now, 4 and some change. It goes up to 5% next year. Personal loans basically actually came down. Right? One of the interesting things, it did not move. All right, so basically what you're seeing is a world that hasn't changed very much in almost a decade. What that means is we have lost out on all of what could have been potential growth during that 10 years. So when you hear people, and we will talk about it, the longest bull market in history, right, has drug us back to where we were when the bottom started. That's all we've done. Now, I'm delighted we got ourselves back to it, but we are at this point no further ahead than we were in about 2007. We're pretty much back to that. The last one I kind of want to bring up and show you is median family income. Expand it up. That better not be mine. Probably is. Go away. If you know me, you know I'm in class. So you know, comment. This one is kind of interesting. This is national. Amarillo's median income isn't quite at this level yet. We'd like to get there, but we're not quite up to that level yet. And this is national. It's growing at 0.5% per year, which effectively tells you that wage earners, if you are looking to make your wealth through your salaries, no, it's not happening, folks. We have had a decade of effectively absolutely flat wages. Now, they're down for a few years, up for a couple of years. There's going to be variation year by year. But the point is that at that level, you cannot accumulate wealth. Now, again, what it brings up is the issue of going forward. Our birth rate right now is plummeting. We're not replacing ourselves. It takes 2.1 children per woman to keep ourselves level. We're at about 1.7, right? Which is marginally disturbing for people my age because I'm counting on all of you to pay my retirement. Right? Hopefully with great comfort. But the point is, if you look at the demographics, you've got a very large group of people at or near retirement being supported by a very small group of hardworking people. And we're not breeding enough to replace ourselves, which means, and again, given our current feelings about immigration, that's how we've always solved that problem. Right? We've traditionally always had birth rates below what is considered to be replacement, at least since the modern industrial era. What has happened now is we're not bringing in the migrants we were bringing in to make up the difference, which effectively means you're going to have, if we don't change policies, again, a small group of people who are going to be taxed exceedingly high to pay for me. And I hope you make your payments because I'm looking forward to receiving mine. But the point is, that is just the mechanics, and there's no way out of it. And again, what it means is that group of people are going to find it with these flat incomes. How are you going to afford it? Right? And that is one of the major concerns. One of the issues about the student debt, 1 in 4 graduating students are now living with their families, their parents, in order to pay their student debt. The average coming out of WT right now, for those not aware, was $20,600. You need to make about $450 a month before tax to pay it off in the 10 years that you're supposed to pay it off at the current rate. So take your monthly income and knock out that $450 before tax. Because remember, you got to pay tax on it, then you got to pay back your student loans. So one of the things that a lot of us are very concerned about is that rate of growth, because those people are not going to be buying the way we've traditionally expected them to. Down at Amarillo National, you need this group of people to start creating families, buy houses, buy appliances, buy kids' toys, etc. The bank thrives off of that. The community thrives off of that. And we're going to put them out there and say, don't do that. Don't have children. Stay with mom and dad and get those debts paid off. But if you do that over a decade, that's going to be a very difficult period. Right? Because again, everybody's now late getting started and trying to catch up. You weren't making those, what I hope, would be those stock market investments in your IRA account, because you're paying off that debt. So that's one of the real challenges that we face going forward. The biggest single challenge, and then I'll let our other speaker have the floor, the biggest single challenge in my mind that scares me the most, cybersecurity. Nobody talks about it, but right now, if you could get the right hacker to shut down the electrical grid, you are talking about trillions of dollars worth of damage. Because you cannot do financial transactions, you can't function, the internet goes down. All somebody has to do is hack the computer system controlling the power grid, and I'm hoping we've got it protected. But cybersecurity, both for corporations and nationally, to me is the most frightening thing going forward. Right? It has nothing to do with the 2008 to 18 crisis, but we need to get focused on these things because it really is critical. The last issue I would raise on those kinds of concerns, if you are not paying attention to China right now, you're living in a fantasy world. All of you love these modern green devices. All of you run around with your phones. What powers it? A lithium-ion battery. What goes into a lithium-ion battery? Lithium, graphite, and cobalt. 80% of the world's cobalt is in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Zambia. All of it, except for the final 15%, controlled by the Chinese. They own the mines. They own the refining facilities, the roads and railroads that get it to Dar es Salaam to get it over to China to make those batteries. If I was Elon Musk, that would be my biggest worry, is where am I going to get my batteries? Right? But you need, if you are interested in any kind of developments that will affect the United States economy, watch what is going on with China. That economy is going to be a major competitor. And major competitors sometimes don't get along well. Right? But the Belt and Road Initiative, there is a railroad right now from Beijing to London, 14 days nonstop. Runs every week, both ways. You have to do what they call trucks, the wheels underneath it. You have to do 2 swaps. Right? One in Kazakhstan and one in Belarus, but they've got that figured out. They just have those big square cranes that pick up the box, move that one over and drop it down on the other car with the other railroad gauge. Russia has a slightly different railroad gauge than the rest of the world, and they go through a piece of Russia. They also are building Dr. Anwar's home country of Pakistan. They have a rail line, highways, and a port at Gwadar that goes straight to China. If you try to cut them off around Singapore through the Straits of Malacca, 30% of the world's import-exports flow through that strait. If you try to cut them off, they'll just take the thing over to Pakistan, unload it in Gwadar, run it up the railroad, and you're in China. They now own the oil, the oil ability to empty the tankers and move it in Sri Lanka, as well as the rest of the port. There is a pipeline being built from Sri Lanka straight into China. So you say, I'll cut you off your oil. They'll just unload it in Sri Lanka and pipe it in. What they're doing is thinking about all of the alternatives. Where could I lose resources or access? And they're filling those holes. So the sad part is, while we're all fascinated, and deservedly so, this Supreme Court nomination is not trivial. In the meantime, the Chinese are still building. And somehow that is just not being watched. I wish we had the same level of excitement on that. But with that, I will turn over the floor.
Good afternoon. My name is John Polley. I'm a financial advisor with Morgan Stanley. So I'm going to focus on the markets. I graduated from college up in Minnesota. So I'm not from here, but I've been down here about 11 years in 2006. So I went into finance, investments, and to work for Morgan Stanley right before the top of the market. And I got to witness the crash right at the beginning of my career. And I'm still here. So I guess I was either lucky or had good timing. So I understand that you all are not probably dealing with massive 401k portfolios. How many of you own a home? No. Okay, we got some faculty. How many of you have investments in the market? You own mutual funds or anything like that? Okay, so I want to make this as digestible as possible. I know much of college is looking forward, and that's a lot of what we're talking about here. But if I were to ask you, raise your hand if you could probably give what you felt like is a really good explanation of what the financial crisis was. How many of you think you could probably explain that? Okay, that's probably what I thought. You were 10, right? Somewhere in that ballpark. So really what we're talking about, when we talk about the financial crisis and the financial meltdown, it's been mentioned before. It had to do with housing. So housing got completely out of control. Banks, large and small, were lending to people that had no business taking out loans. Prices went through the roof. And eventually, when you pull out one little piece of the Jenga puzzle, it all comes crashing down. And that's what happened in 2008. Pat mentioned this just huge empty period from 2009 to 2016, where a lot happened, but the economy didn't really improve that much. And one of the reasons for that, he mentioned the stock market. Is this all right to use up here? Sure. Okay. So what the Federal Reserve did was they hoped that if they pumped a whole bunch of money into the economy, that things would recover and everything would be okay. Which brings one major concern, and that's inflation. If you pile a whole bunch of money into the economy, prices might skyrocket. The idea with monetary policy is that if you can accelerate money, the velocity of money, you print some, you give it to the banks lend it to somebody else goes and spends it, and that money expands the economy. But here's kind of what happened, and I'm just going to do this really simply. So if we were to go up to, here's the crisis, 2008, okay? The supply of money in the economy and the velocity of money basically were together, okay? 2008, the Federal Reserve decided, okay, we need to do something to fix this. So they printed money, they pumped it into the banks, we talked about the bailouts, and the overall supply of money in the economy went, I'm just gonna call this the money base. If you can't read that, that's fine. Went skyrocketing. But the banks didn't lend it out. And when I say banks, I'm talking more of the big financial institutions that we would think of, the JP Morgans, the Wells Fargos. The regulations on them were so oppressive. They didn't know what was coming. Are we out of the woods? Are we going under? I'll tell you one quick story. When I was first at Morgan Stanley, this was 2008, I can't remember when, but this was the bottom. So we'd mentioned the Lehman crisis. Our firm was days, hours from going out of business. And I was just at the bottom end of the totem pole, so I didn't really understand entirely what was going on. But I will never forget being called back into the conference room at our branch in Amarillo. And we all thought, this is it. It's Friday afternoon. They're going to tell us we're not open on Monday. You're going to have to find a new job. And what happened was we had a Japanese bank that pumped a bunch of money into our company, and we survived. From there, we've kind of seen this slow recovery in the economy up until 2016, but the stock market went nuts. So when I went back to the banks, I'm talking about the big banks, this is what happened with actually the velocity of money. And now I say velocity, I mean that got lent out, people bought things, people took out loans. It didn't go anywhere. A couple years after the financial crisis, you started to hear concerns about hyperinflation, what's going to be the next crash, and they thought it was going to be inflation. The problem is the money didn't go anywhere. The Federal Reserve pumped money into these banks and they just sat on it. They sat on it because they were afraid of regulations, which there were tons of. They were afraid of the next crisis. They didn't want to get caught up in that again. And so the money didn't go anywhere, which has really saved a lot of those banks because they were overcapitalized and still are. So when you hear people talk about, okay, when's the next financial crisis? Is it going to happen again? Well, it may, but if it does, it's going to look nothing like the last one. There is so much capital, so much money sitting on the balance sheets of these large financial institutions that wasn't the case back in 2008. So since then, tons and tons of regulations. My job has gotten significantly less fun in the last 10 years. We have to get permission from 150 different people to order tissues. It's been oppressive up until about 2016. So let me fast forward 2016, 2018. Because the economy, finance, the stock market, my job has gotten significantly more interesting since the last election. Let me just give you some brief numbers here recently. And some of this you all can connect with, and some of it won't make much sense, but that's okay. We have currently record low unemployment. I think the last number was 3.9%. It may have touched 3.8, 3.9 a couple times in history. Record low unemployment, and that's across the board. So all social classes, all race, gender, record low unemployment. We have record high business optimism. Surveys are something that we see all the time in finance. So they do a small business survey. They go out and ask a bunch of small businesses, what's your level of optimism? About 2 months ago, we saw the highest recorded survey in history from small businesses. So optimism is high. Wages are up. Benefits are up. And by benefits, I mean 401k matches, health insurance programs up. Taxes are down, both on the corporate level and the personal level. GDP. So you're all pretty familiar with what GDP is. Basically, the growth of our overall economy is over 4%. It has been a long time since we saw numbers like that. Corporate earnings. So next week, we're about to start the next round of corporate earnings where big US companies come out and they announce how much money they have made, how much money they expect to make. The last 3 quarters, those numbers have been up 20% every quarter over last year. And we expect the same this quarter. The companies will report earnings 20% higher than last year. And though most of you said you don't have money in the stock market, if you looked at the market returns last year, they were historic. 20% again coming. So where are we now and kind of what has changed? Inevitably, and I don't want to get overly political, but a massive shift that has happened in the last 2 years is that you can no longer separate politics and investments. Coming into the business, I was told over and over again, don't talk to your clients about politics. They don't want to hear it. They may not agree with you. Now, our clients are not shy about talking about politics, but I was told, don't bring it up. Doesn't matter. You're going to lose clients. You don't want to alienate half of your client base by saying you support or don't support whoever's in office. But in 2016 to present, it is absolutely impossible to separate the two. So just to give you some figures of what's happened since 2016 in the economy, we are up from election day nearly 50% in the market. So the stock market is up 50% since the election in 2016. Our economy has grown by $9.3 trillion in a little bit less than 2 years. Something very interesting also happened prior to and after the election. So we get people in our office all of the time who we call wholesalers. They represent different mutual fund companies, ETF companies, insurance companies, and they want us to use their products with our clients. And so what was strange is you would start to see a divergence of opinion leading up to the election based on where their economic advisors were located. So prior to the election, there were 2 camps, okay? If you were a supporter of our now president, and if you lived outside of some of the major hubs, major cities in America, you were generally more optimistic leading into the election. And the days afterward, after we had the results. On the other end, if you were somebody who did not support our current president and saw him get elected and were from a major city, you had a very different opinion of what the economy was going to do. I'll give you one example. A good friend of mine who's been in all the time came in slightly after the election. I said, what do you think? He said, well, we think we're going to have trade wars. We think it's time to get defensive. It's time to sell. You need to raise cash. It's going to be really, really rough. Well, that didn't make any sense to me, but I live in a different part of the country. And so I asked him, I said, well, where is your guy located? He said, what do you mean? I said, physically, where is your economist located? He said, New York City. I said, well, I'm taking the exact opposite end of the spectrum. I said, we think that the US economy is going to explode. And we ended up getting into an argument. We're good friends, but my point is, and I actually saw an article on this, which I didn't think I would see an article, but this is Monday. Bloomberg, which is just a financial publication, put out an article about the stock market return difference between Democrats and Republicans from 2016. And again, remember, my whole career I was told don't ever bring up politics. But it matters, because if you thought the world was going to end because Donald Trump was elected, what would you do with your money? You would get out of the stock market, you would buy treasuries, bonds, CDs, leave your money in cash, and a lot of people did that. Now, if you took the other end of the spectrum and you thought, well, this guy's going to be great, I love him, business guy, what would you have done with your money? You would have bought stocks. So the survey says that if you were a Republican over the last 2 years, you made significantly more money than Democrats. And that really has nothing to do with whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, other than politics now affects the way people invest their money. And we see that all of the time. So my first question when someone comes into my office and says, well, here's what we think is, well, where are you located? And if they're located in a large city, generally speaking, they're going to have a different view than an economist who's located in a different part of the country. Florida, Colorado, somewhere in the Midwest. So it's inescapable now to separate what's happening in the political world and what you do with your money. It's on the news all the time. Tariffs. What do you think about tariffs? Well, if you thought tariffs were going to end the world, as people were actually saying, then you would have done X with your money. If you thought, no, this is going to be positive for us, you would have done Y with your money. And so that's probably the biggest thing I have seen recently in the last 2 years is that that conversation happens all of the time now. And it's not a, where do you fall in the political spectrum? We can't get along. It's simply, what is your view of the world? And your view of the world now greatly impacts what you do with your money. So moving forward, and let me give you one other example. This is from my own firm. So I printed this article. This goes back to February of this year. If you were paying attention, which many of you probably had no reason to, but at the beginning of this year, we went from record market highs to higher record market highs in January. February, we had a sharp, fast correction of about 10%. And so you had people totally split. This is the beginning of the end, or no, this is just a slight correction and we have a lot more to go. So Morgan Stanley, if you're recording this, don't send it to my people in New York. Morgan Stanley was all over the news with headlines like, Morgan Stanley says stock slide was appetizer for the real deal. So our people in New York and overseas were saying that this is just the beginning. Later in the year, we're going to get the real thing. And all over our social media, so we're trying to be very technology, very relevant now. We have social media. You can follow me on LinkedIn. But all of our suggested posts from the company were raise cash, get defensive, which here in Amarillo, Texas, we didn't believe. So there was a divide even within our own firm. So our company was out in February telling you to raise cash and get defensive. Well, if you were watching the stock market this week, new all-time highs across the board. So even within one firm, you have these divides of where are you located? How do you view the world? What do you think is going to happen? And that's something that never used to be the case. There were analysts that you would look to and they would be apolitical. It didn't matter. We were just looking at numbers. We were just looking at individual companies, and that's no longer the case. Everything is global. Everything is political. And it's not that it's necessarily a bad thing. It's just something you have to take into consideration when we invest clients' money. And that's probably the biggest change I've seen here over the last 12 to 18 months. So with that, I think we're going to leave some time for some questions. Good? Okay.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, we do have time for Q&A. So Jim, let me ask you this question. I go overseas every year and you also do the same. Emerging markets population is what we call a time bomb. No employment opportunities. What do you think happening over there, although our population and changes are totally different? Are we still interdependent?
The unemployment levels, Southern Europe are still running in the 17 to 20% range. It is absolutely tragic. It's going to be a lost generation. It truly is. They're not able to form families, to build anything, and many of them are very well educated. It's not a function of talent. It's just there's no opportunity. And with what's going on with Brexit right now, and the argument we're having about Italy's deficit, I knew that they were going to do that. That's our national broadcast alert. Really need to do that when I'm in class. But I do think most of the emerging markets are facing a really tough uphill battle right now. Partially, a lot of the Asian countries, there's a lot of uncertainty because until the trade war issues are settled out, they're highly dependent on China. And so it's not a question of being in an argument with them, but you're in an argument with their buyers or their suppliers. So I think there's going to be some real issues in some of those markets. It is one of the reasons some of these countries, you have to appreciate, you're going on 30 to 40 years of virtually no opportunity to improve yourself. If you are a young person growing up in that world, the drive to get out of there is incredible. I mean, it's just, if you see some of the people coming up out of Central America, they are walking to the US border. I mean, hundreds, if not thousands of miles just to try to improve their lives. It gives you an idea of just how grim some of these situations are. Venezuela and Argentina are time bombs waiting to explode. We've got these issues all over. So those of us in the United States should be thrilled beyond description that we live in such a stable environment.
Professor Owens, so like my generation has grown up with nothing but success. So as you know, as we get ready to invest, there's that kind of fear that the market's going to go down because it's been good for so long. So what would you advice be to younger generation investing?
I stop. Simple. At your age, you can recover from a down. At my age, I can't do a 10-year down. Well, I'll probably do it right now, but I don't want to. Right? So at my age, you start getting conservative. You start calling up Pat and saying, hey, I got X amount I need to stash in some CDs. That's my rat hole money. But at your age, I don't care if you get a 5, 6, 7-year downturn. We used to have an old-fashioned investment strategy called dollar cost averaging. For you, that's what you ought to do. Set aside a certain amount every month, high market, low market, put that money to work. Sometimes you won't get many shares, other times you'll get a whole bunch. On average, you'll win. If you go back to 1928 to 2018, at your age, there should not even be a doubt. Get into equities. Just do it. You know, you need to have a couple $1,000 in case the transmission unwinds. But beyond that, put that money in the stock. And just forget where you put it. Buy good companies and don't try to trade. Your commissions will eat you alive. There's nobody, and I'm sure you'll back it up, there's nobody's ever been able to prove they can time the market. I mean, they just can't. Warren Buffett is absolutely brilliant at what he does. Even he doesn't time the market. I mean, he buys good companies and hangs on. Some years are good, some years are bad, but on balance, he's made a lot of money. While I'm on that point, there is one interesting statistic that involved Mr. Buffett. Did any of you happen to realize that there are 3 people in this country who hold enough wealth to match the bottom 50%, which is 162 million people? There's 3 people, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, and Warren Buffett. If you put their wealth together, it exceeds that of the bottom 162 million people in the United States. All 3 did it on equities. They did it on stocks. In case of Gates, it's Microsoft. Obviously, he built something, but he hung on to his stock. In case of Bezos with Amazon, I mean, they just raised to $15 an hour salaries, including Whole Foods, and they're raising them in Europe. I was watching the BBC last night. They're raising them in the United Kingdom. Well, Walmart just went to 11. If you multiply 11 times out the number of hours a week you work, that's below poverty level. So now Walmart's under pressure to go to 15. But, I mean, true, at your age, buy stocks. Find yourself a broker who's willing to open a small account and just keep putting it in there. It will pay off. Yeah, you're gonna have some downs. Just ride them out. At your age, you can wait.
Can I just ask a question? How many of you all feel like you are comfortable putting money into the stock market when you get your first job? Or how many of you feel this anxiety, this fear that we're gonna have a crash? I can't do it. How many of you said you were comfortable doing it? Okay, how many are on the fear of another crash? Okay.
We beat on it pretty hard.
What about investing? What about investing when you have student loans? Would you recommend paying off student loans first or just invest anyways?
I would do a both and. I mean, I'm not your age, but I'm fairly young. It kind of depends on the rate you're paying, to not get too much into just basic finance. But if you have a low rate that you're paying on your student loan, I would say pay them off quicker than your basic payment. But the interest is deductible, which is helpful. And we really don't think that the market is overheated. I think there's a lot of opportunity over the next several years. The data I mentioned, it's better than it has been in a long time. The stock market is not overvalued. So I would say both. I wouldn't neglect investing for your future to pay off your student loans immediately. But any debt is not advisable to hang on to and linger.
But those student loans are around 4.5% to 5% right now. Right, for the next decade, and it's a lock rate.
Yeah.
Once you start paying, it's a lock rate. The market's well above that. So not advising, don't pay them, but I'd pay them off, and whatever else I could squirrel away, I would in the market, because you're earning a higher return.
Yes.
If we have a change of presidency in the next 2 years, do you see an economic flip in the other direction?
It depends on how it plays out between now and then. There's three pieces. We've got a president, we have Congress. There's a lot that one can do without the other. And there has been an enormous amount of change that's already taken place that would be hard to undo. But honestly, I mentioned, I wasn't making that up about the politics affecting the way you invest. If we had a presidential change, depending on who it was and how far to the other side that person was, it would absolutely change my opinion. So the economy is strong. Businesses were doing well for the last 8 years, but they were getting squashed by regulation. And now with tax cuts, regulations being backed off, those companies that were strong are now actually spending the money that they had held back. So I don't think it's an end of the world scenario, but yeah, I think it would dramatically change my investment opinion.
One quick question, Pat, and I think Mr. Simpson is over there, Paul Simpson. He's from the Congressman Thornberry's office. He's the director over there. Pat, do you think, is it possible in the next 5, 6, 10 years to get a big jackpot like a company like Boeing coming to Amarillo? Because that came out to be a pretty big deal. Do we have any chance?
I think we have a wonderful chance. Not only are we in the center of the country, we're in Texas, which is the friendliest business environment of any state in the country. We have a strong workforce. We have great graduates coming out of WT, Texas Tech, Amarillo College. We have great work ethic, and there's no reason we shouldn't have a giant, either manufacturing, distribution, any kind of company like that come to our part of the country. We just have to sell it. There's a lot of things people don't want to come here for. There's not enough to do for the young people. It's flat, and they say it doesn't rain. So if we can just get some of those things to go our way over the next couple of years, that's a wonderful recruiting tool, because I think you'll see, and all of us up here will tell you, this is not only a great place to do business, but it's a wonderful place to raise your family. It's a wonderful place to create a legacy, and it's a place to be proud of. So all those things going for us, yeah, we can sell it. And with strong people like Mac and Congress, we're set up to do really well.
Well, you also have a very nice advantage. How many of you have been outside today? I mean, you can fly out of this place 362 days out of the year. I mean, we're one of the few places in the United States that we just don't shut down. And if I were doing distribution or wherever, that's where I'd want to be, is where I know the roads are open and so is the airport. And we got the rail, I mean, and it works. I mean, we're always ready to roll. Whereas many parts of the country can't say that. Who would have thought Phoenix would have flooded?
Just want to show you two more books. House of Debt. These are two Pakistani professors. They have written an excellent book. We were discussing it, 214. And I just bought this last week. A Crash. I haven't even started it. 700 pages. It just came out. Dr. Owens also is reading this book. But before we finish, I want to appreciate and thank our primary chapter advisor, Dr. Kilich is over there. She is the founding chapter advisor. She started it in 2014. Now we can see all the good things. And one last thing, all the chapter activities, every other week we meet. It is all funded by College of Business. So we need to thank Dr. Dean Tariq, because he has financially funded it, and his administrative staff is also helping us a lot. Tanner is one of the examples. So we also thank him for all his support. But we do have a little appreciation for you from the chapter. But thank you so much, and we appreciate, and we will have the same session in maybe 5-6 months. Thank you so much.